Hi students, it's Dr. Newmark here. This is our week 9, I think it's week 9, but I know the content is correct. I may have the week number wrong. This is our presentation for the week, the weekly highlights. So I really think this video is going to be shorter than the other ones because I'm only going to be talking about two authors, Arthur Asa Berger, chapter 3 in Lestron Typography. In this syllabus and course calendar, I guess, I did mention Roberts for this week, but that was actually an error because we covered Roberts last week. So I will not cover that in this video today. So let's jump right in. Okay, I know this is a very long list of bullet points, but these are the main elements, the basic elements that Arthur Asa Berger discusses in his chapter. Now, if you've studied elements of design in another discipline, perhaps art or graphic design, you may have encountered this list as being comprised of a different number of elements. Sometimes there are 5, sometimes there are 7. When I teach this at an undergraduate level, we generally focus on 7, but this is a more exhaustive list. And I think we've engaged with this briefly in the past, but this is the comprehensive list. So we have dots, lines, shapes with which Berger describes as having character, circles, squares, triangles, the concept of, or the phenomenon of volume, which adds depth, scale, judging this is dependent on the relationship between objects, spatiality, cluttered pages versus sparsely designed ones. So spatial decisions are made strategically in order to emphasize certain information on a page. Balance, direction, lighting. So following Barth, Berger remarks that the nature of the lighting establishes the intensity of the experience for people. So perspective, psychological closure, gestalt, proportion, color, which includes hues, saturation, brightness, warmth, and coolness, contextual relationships. Now, this is a pretty exhaustive list, but I feel that after reading the chapter, I mean, this is like a basic toolkit, an analytical toolkit that you can use these terminologies to basically deconstruct images, documents, pamphlets, web content, the sort of things you would encounter as a technical or professional communicator. You can use these terminologies to help explain to people who may not have a similar design training or training in sort of rhetorical analysis of visual information. You will be able to communicate with them persuasively about why some things work better than others for persuading users. So let's take a look at some examples. Okay, so here are a few examples that I just pulled quickly. So we have dots. We see this sort of pointillism idea here with these dots, which are larger in the center and thinner. The point is thinner and even in a faded hue. Here in this cluster there, this one, dots, and then we see this image of this reclining young man with a castle in the background, and that is comprised of points. So this is sort of a pointillistic effect here. As you probably know, there are many French painters who are very renowned for a pointillistic technique. So you can look that up if you're a student of art history or just a person in the world who's encountered those artworks. Next, we have lighting, and I chose this image last year when I originally designed this presentation. It was a photo that I had recently taken of our dog in my son's bedroom window in Tampere, Finland. And I thought that the lighting, as well as the perspective effect, and this also touches upon the idea of direction, like directing the viewer's eye towards a certain point in the distance, but it's mostly the light that makes the effect what it is in this picture. It draws your eye towards the center upper half of the image, and then you can see the dog sort of silhouetted against the window. I just happen to like this picture. And just as an aside, our dog lived in an apartment last year in Finland, and I think he was pretty solemn about the fact that he couldn't just go outside and run around. So he would go up into this window and look down on the main street and see all the trams passing and the people walking and the birds flying. And this was his way to pass the time between walks when he could go outside. Okay, and then the third thing that I'm showing on this page is basically my attempt to show two things. One, a specific one of these design elements, which is shape, and then an abundance of elements all combined together on the cover of this Land Tech product guide from 2020-2021. So you see on the inside, this autonomous car page, you see shape used, also sometimes called the concept of enclosure, to unite certain categories of information to each other. So this is a technical drawing that you see here of this autonomous car, but design elements are used in order to emphasize technical information to make it more comprehensible to the users of this brochure. So I try to really run the gamut between sort of personal visual information, which is this just photo from my phone of my dog, to like historical artworks, like the one on the left, to the sorts of products, outputs that might in fact be generated in like an engineering context or a technical workplace, which is on the right. All right, so in order to further that last point about the way that images and some of these design elements are used in technical workplaces, I'm including here 2 pages from a report, or actually a technical proposal from this nonprofit, the Global Facility for Disaster Reduction and Recovery, GFDRR, and as they describe themselves, they're a multi-donor partnership that supports low and middle income countries to understand, manage, and reduce their risks from natural hazards and climate change. So they chose on the front page of this technical proposal to include this image, which is of a parched landscape, cracked by drought. And if you look back at those design elements that Arthur Asser Berger outlined for you, you can see many of them reflected in this basically visually jarring, but also effectively communicative image. It resonates with the theme of this proposal, but it also does that because it's visually powerful, visually coherent. And why is that? So think back to those elements of design and think about why this is effective. Now, people often talk about how, in my field, technical communication, how we are often in proposal writing, in grant writing, in technical proposals and procedures, instructions, often limited by the parameters that are established by government agencies. You must conform to certain design templates. I write about this a lot concerning bureaucratic form design in the late 19th and early 20th century in the Bureau of Indian Affairs. The important thing to know is that somebody came up with the template. I've argued this many times, that these forms and these templates themselves are not innocuous. The design itself is a persuasive enterprise, like coming up with the design of something, the template that somebody must use. But so if you look at the example on the right-hand side, this is perhaps benign, innocuous. I'm not going to make any real profound arguments about this, but you do see some of the information organizational tactics that we see everywhere and often don't question, and I'm not saying there's anything wrong with them here. So we can look at them as a way of organizing textual information, such as headings, bold and italicized font, wrapped text, in this case, actually, the text is not wrapped around the image. It is adjacent to the image. But we see this image that shows the countries that are involved in this proposal, and it uses color to emphasize certain concepts or certain bits of persuasive information that they are conveying in the adjacent text. So if we look at this in a more engaged fashion, just for the purposes of analysis in this class, not that you would do this if you're actually reading this technical proposal, you wouldn't do a rhetorical analysis of it, that we can look at the way that the text is designed, and certain parts of it are emphasized, how sort of established conventions of hierarchy are used, and we can look at the way that the authors of this proposal decided to represent visually the impacted areas of concern in this proposal. So you might question, why did they crop it the way that they did? Why did they use the colors that they did? All of these kinds of questions are germane to this. So again, they were probably limited in what they could do in terms of the parameters of the grant, perhaps, that they were applying for with this technical proposal for the Disaster Risk Financing Challenge Fund. there have to be parameters, or else a funding agency would get things designed in all different kinds of ways, and then the readers, the evaluators, would have to learn anew every time how to extract the information they needed from all of these different outputs. So the parameters are very much needed in order to ease the flow of the evaluators through all these different proposals. But we can use the terminologies from Berger to actually closely analyze something that seems just so bureaucratic and sort of neutral, benign, but nevertheless, it's a rich exercise for us. Okay, so Lester, again, typography, and I'm headed into my last few slides here, which I think are really interesting ones. So Lester offers an overview of the history of the printing press and its status as an engine of democratizing information consumption and distribution, as well as of the age of accessibility to the written word, an age that began with the printing of the Bible. So if you read about the Gutenberg Bible and the printing press, it's not the first time you've heard about this, but nevertheless, we are still, I would say, active descendants of this innovation where movable type was employed to make documents and books available to people who otherwise only had limited access to them, because with illuminated manuscripts, if they were housed in a monastery or a church or wherever that might have been, or among the wealthy and the monarchs, then regular people would not have had access to them, and they wouldn't have had the skills to engage with them if they were not literate. So many opportunities were unlocked or accelerated through the advancement made possible by the printing press. So spanning the centuries between Gutenberg and contemporary typefaces, we can see the legacies of technological innovation as well as a flourishing of increasingly technologized design strategies. And now it would potentially seem that these opportunities are boundless with AI tools. You know, you can say, create a bespoke typeface for me that conveys these things. Like we saw in the Auburn typeface example, which was done manually. We discussed that last week. You could ask AI to do all of that work for you. That would vacate the whole sort of hands-on, tangible process of doing that, of experiencing the environment and bringing it all into play to create a typeface that reflected a place, an atmosphere, a mission, a culture. But I'm just making the point that you could do it. You could just insert a prompt into ChatGPT and something would pop out for you. So in that vein, this first example is resonant with the Finnish national epic, which I've mentioned in previous slides. You're going to be so tired of hearing about Finland, but again, I just came back in June, and the Fulbright was a very moving and powerful experience for me, and I want to share that with you. So I hope you will excuse me for doing that. So the Kalevala is their national epic, and I put in Kalevala typeface into a Google Images search. So what do you make of these Kalevala typefaces? Describe them functionally as well as by cultural association, purpose, and impact. Now, to my Finnish students, this meant something. They knew about the Kalevala. They had read parts of it. It's an epic poem. It had a lot to do with Finland's independence and their cultural autonomy. So for them, they could, from a keen cultural context, really grapple with what this font looked like, how it was designed, what it meant to them, where they'd seen it. This example in the middle, in the sort of block typeface, is sort of an interesting outlier, but you see that many of them have this calligraphic approach that looks old, like it has sort of that old style. Why is that? But I'm going to set this to the side for a minute, because this isn't very much in any of your wheelhouses, I wouldn't think. I mean, unless I have any Finns in the class, which I don't think I do, because I know all of your names, and I'm not seeing anybody's last name be like Mustonen or Latoma or anything like that. So let's move along and show you something that might resonate with you a little bit more. So this is what I got when I put in New Mexico typeface. It's so different. I wish it were easier for me when I was recording these videos to go back and forth between slides, to toggle back and forth. But what I want to show you here is how New Mexico is rendered typographically. Like, what do you think? What does this tell you? What do we see here? This one obviously conveys a sort of graffiti style, this New Mexico typeface. We have this one that is this sort of like angled block font that almost looks engraved. What do you make of that? We have these cursive-like fonts here, and then we have this sort of rounded serif, all caps font. This one almost looks like a sports jersey with the swooping line coming from the M underneath the font. So I don't know if this means anything to you, but if you think back to sort of the collision between Lester's discussion of typeface and Asa Berger's discussion of all of these design elements, we can see how it is important to send sort of cultural messages through the combined efforts to not sort of like accidentally create a font to represent a place, but to purposefully do that. I know I've dwelled on that a lot in the last 2 weeks, but I just wanted to see what I got. And you can play around with this too. Like if you're from Florida or you're from another country, you can see what kind of results you get when you put such and such typeface into a Google Images search. Or you can ask AI to create a typeface for you that represents all of those themes. Like basically, as I said, do the Auburn typeface experiment using AI. So I think it's important to do it manually, but it might be interesting to do it with AI as well. Okay, so that is all this week. It's a pretty light week. All of this stuff is sort of pretty formalist or functional, although we can make it as philosophical and theoretical as we would like. But on that note, I'm going to sign off from this video, and I will see you in the highlights video. Again, you will see me in the highlights video next week because I can't see you through the screen, and I don't know who else watching this video, but I will produce another video next week. Have a nice remainder of your week.